Let's be real. Usopp might be one of the most relatable Straw Hats and one of the most underappreciated. Since the earliest days of One Piece, he's been a walking contradiction, a coward who dreams of being a brave warrior, a liar who tells stories so fantastical they end up being true, and a weakling with one of the strongest hearts on the crew. But somewhere along the Grand Line, post Enies Lobby, and especially post time skip, the spotlight started slipping away from our favorite long-nosed sniper. And while the characters like Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, and even Nico Robin and Jinbei have had their time to evolve, Usopp has largely been left in the background. His most significant moment arguably being the Dressrosa arc, where God Usopp was born. And even that was more comic relief than an earned divine title. But here's the thing. One Piece isn't finished, and Eiichiro Oda doesn't drop titles or callbacks by accident. Usopp's journey to Elbaf isn't just about a location on the map. It's a return to a dream that began long before the Straw Hat Pirates set sail on their grand adventure. The island of giants represents the culmination of Usopp's deepest aspirations. Going back to his first encounter with giants in Little Garden, Usopp was exposed to the world of giants, a land where sheer power and legendary battles were commonplace. He saw giants like Dory and Brogy, not just as towering figures, but as symbols of the very thing he longed to become, a brave warrior of the sea. It was there that Usopp's dreams were solidified. He could imagine himself as a hero, a sniper with the power to protect his friends, a warrior who could stand shoulder to shoulder with his legends. And yet, as much as we saw Usopp's dreams growing at that time, Oda's treatment of him post-time skip has been, well, somewhat lackluster. Post-time skip, Usopp's growth has seemed to stagnate. We've had moments of accidental greatness, like his time in Dressrosa, but even those moments often felt like they were due to happenstance rather than Usopp earning a moment to truly shine. His title of God Usopp in that arc wasn't a reflection of his strength, but rather a misunderstanding of his words with Harujin. It was hilarious, but it wasn't the heroic arc we'd expected. But let's look at Usopp's development before the time skip, because that's where Oda truly began laying the groundwork for Usopp's transformation. Pre-time skip Usopp was very much defined by his fear. Fear of confrontation, fear of failure, fear of being inadequate. His alter ego Soge King was born out of this fear, but it was also a necessary step in his journey. Because you see, Soge King allowed Usopp to shed his crippling insecurities, to stand up and fight in a way that his normal self couldn't. When Usopp in his Soge King persona burnt the world government flag in Enies Lobby, it was a pivotal moment. Without the mask of Soge King, the Usopp we know wouldn't have had the courage to do that. But as we saw, Soge King represents a version of Usopp that isn't bound by his fear. He could act, he could stand tall, and he could fight for what he believed in. That moment was incredibly significant, but it also marked the beginning of a shift in Usopp's narrative. Post-time skip, the character has unfortunately been placed somewhat on the back burner. We've seen brief flashes of Usopp's potential, but Oda has shifted the spotlight elsewhere. The larger arcs have focused more on Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, and others, with Usopp's narrative taking a more passive role. For example, in Dressrosa, Usopp's contributions were often accidental or indirect. While he played a role in defeating Sugar and contributing to the battle against the Flamingo, those moments weren't really his story. They were just part of a larger chain of events that benefited him and his crew, rather than being a direct result of his growth or courage. This brings us back to Elbaf, where Usopp's narrative is finally said to come full circle. Elbaf is not just a place on the map. It's the land that represents the fulfillment of a dream Usopp has been carrying with him since his earliest days in the Grand Line. The giants who once inspired him to become a warrior now stand as the embodiment of the power he strives to match. And Elbaf itself serves as a spiritual and literal destination for Usopp's growth. However, this isn't just about Usopp finding validation in the strength of the giants. It's about him confronting his own inner fears. Much like the current predicament the inhabitants of Elbaf are in, Usopp has always been someone who feared his inadequacy, feared the dangers of the world around him. But this arc is shaping up to be his chance to face those fears head on. The giants of Elbaf are facing their own challenges. Giant children who are manipulated by the Holy Knights using their fears, and even great giant warriors trembling at their greatest fears, their mums. As these giants struggle, we see the crux of the theme. Fear. The fear that controls them, the fear that drives them into chaos. For Usopp, this is more than just a narrative parallel. It's a moment of introspection. He's not just a sniper or sidekick. He is a character who has been defined by his fear for so long, and it's time for that fear to be confronted in a meaningful way. Usopp's path will not simply be about proving his worth through feats of strength or skill. It's going to be about personal growth, about overcoming the fear that has held him back for so long. Elbaf is a land of warriors, of giants, of legends. But for Usopp, it's about stepping out of the shadows of those legends and becoming his own hero. This is the arc where Usopp's promise must be fulfilled. Not by accidental heroics, but by him taking ownership of his dreams, his fears, and his place in the Straw Hat crew. In Norse mythology, Heimdall is a vital figure known as the guardian of the Bifrost, the rainbow bridge that links Asgard and Midgard. His role extended beyond guarding the bridge. He was the vigilant sentinel of the cosmos, assigned with watching over all realms. With unmatched sight and hearing, Heimdall could perceive the faintest sounds and see across vast distances, even in darkness. These extraordinary senses gave him an almost omniscient awareness of events across the worlds. Heimdall's foresight further elevated his importance. He was not only a passive observer, but also a seer and harbinger of fate. This is symbolized through his connection to the Hela horn, a trumpet whose blast would signal the beginning of Ragnarok, the god's final battle. The horn underscores his role as the first to recognize and announce great upheavals, standing ready to face them. As the guardian of the Bifrost, Heimdall served as a bridge between gods and humans, mortality and divinity. His role symbolized the balance between realms, positioning him as both protector and mediator. Watching over this cosmic threshold, Heimdall maintained harmony and stood ever prepared for the moment he would need to act. In the case of Usopp, his connection to this godly figure is not about his latent observation Haki, or any mystical ability to perceive the future in the traditional sense. Instead, Usopp's connection to Heimdall lies in his prophetic lies, and the way his impossible tales often end up coming true. We all know that Usopp is a master of exaggeration and outright fabrication, whether it's the tale of the giant goldfish he spun in Syrup Village or the wild story of the little people he claimed to have seen. Usopp's tales are more than simple fibs. They are prophetic in nature, as the impossible often turns out to be real in the end. Take for instance the giant goldfish with poop the size of islands. At the time, no one believed him, dismissing it as another of his exaggerated lies. But fast forward to the Little Garden arc, and the giant goldfish appeared, confirming Usopp's story in a way that was both absurd and brilliantly true. This was the first example of Usopp's lies turning into reality, setting the tone for his character's strange connection to foresight. And it doesn't stop there. In Dressrosa, Usopp's bizarre claim about little people turned out to be another instance of his prophetic ability. He told Kaya back in Syrup Village about these tiny magical people, which sounded absurd at the time. Yet when the Tontata, tiny, adorable, and incredibly capable warriors appeared in Dressrosa, it was as if Usopp had somehow foretold their arrival, and his lies became undeniable truths. These aren't just coincidences, they point to something deeper about Usopp's role as a character, and how he mirrors the qualities of Heimdall, the seer who perceives and shapes the future, often without realizing it. It's as if he is tapping into a future where these incredible events are destined to unfold. Whether or not he fully understands it, just like Heimdall could predict and observe the future, Usopp's wild tales often contain an unspoken truth that manifests later, making him a kind of prophetic figure within the Straw Hat crew. His imagined realities often come true, much like Heimdall's foresight guided the gods in preparation for Ragnarok. And that's where the true parallel lies. But unlike Heimdall, who sees the future with clarity, Usopp's insight is much more indirect and absurd. His lies come from a place of pure creativity and imagination. Yet they are not without consequence. For example, when Usopp exaggerates his own prowess in battle, those lies set events into motion that transform the world around him. The more Usopp believes in his own creations, the more those creations seem to have an odd way of becoming reality. Can you imagine if his lie in Wano suddenly came true? I mean, despite it being a lie, there is a grain of truth to the idea that Usopp's ambition could one day give birth to such a power. After all, Conqueror's Haki is not about raw strength. It's about the ability to dominate through sheer will. And if anyone has the power to have such sheer will, it would be a brave warrior of the sea. But for now, this remains a playful what-if scenario. But here is a trait that cannot be ignored. Heimdall's role as the Harbinger of Ragnarok mirrors Usopp's uncanny tendency to unknowingly spark climactic events. At Eni's lobby, it was Usopp disguised as Soge King who burnt the world government's flag, a defiant act that ignited the crew's final clash with CP9. In Dressrosa, his perfectly timed knockout of Sugar unraveled the Flamingo's control over the kingdom, setting the revolution in motion. Even outside the canon manga, in One Piece Stampede, Usopp was the first to reach the treasure. If Elbaf is to be the stage for the world's next major upheaval, it's not hard to imagine Usopp perhaps standing among giants, blowing a horn to signal the start of the final war. Like Heimdall, Usopp is a symbolic herald of change, whose actions echo louder than anyone expects, until it's already too late. It's no coincidence that Usopp dreams of becoming a brave warrior of the sea, a title that in One Piece often aligns with the values and culture of Elbaf's giants. From the very start, his bond with Dorian Brogy hinted at something deeper, that Usopp isn't just a dreamer, but the one destined to reconnect the Straw Hats and maybe even the world with the legendary land of giants. As the bridge between men and giants, he wouldn't just walk among them, he would earn their respect, embodying the values they hold dear: courage, honor, and storytelling. If Heimdall stands at the threshold of gods and mortals, then Usopp may well become the threshold between humanity and giantkind, a living link between past myth and future destiny. His link to these giants goes back further all the way to his father, who by extension of being part of Shanks' crew, has had connections to Elbaf. So how could Oda use the current events to show us the true potential of God Usopp? Usopp has always embodied fear, not as weakness but as a mirror for the reader. He is the only Straw Hat who feels fear deeply and still chooses to fight. In an arc where the enemy weaponizes fear through Soma's fear-based devil fruit and the aura of the Holy Knights, Usopp could become the counterweight, showing how fear can be faced and overcome without needing to be erased. This would be a direct correlation to how Perona's devil fruit had no effect on him because he was too negative. Usopp's long-standing gag, his lies becoming truth, and his funny sicknesses that always show up when it's time to show up, might take on a darker prophetic tone in this arc. If someone like Somers or Killingham tries to extract and weaponize Usopp's deepest fears or past lies, it could backfire. Because Usopp owns those lies and he always operates in fear. He's already lived the lies. He was Soge King. He did encounter a giant goldfish with poop the size of islands. He did have 8,000 subordinates and he did become the hero of the Tontata in spite of his fears. If fear monsters are conjured from internal doubts or lies, Usopp may be one of the few who can neutralize them by turning his own fears into weapons of hope. The giants are paralyzed by fear, reliving trauma from their mothers. Usopp, once the most cowardly of all, might be the one to stand before them, trembling but unshaken, and declare, "If I can face my fear, so can you." It wouldn't be strength that moves them. It would be the courage of someone weak who refuses to run. This has happened before. By no means can Usopp defeat one of the Holy Knights on his own, but he just needs to be a symbol. Instead, I'm more convinced that Robin will be the one to save Soul this time. And of course, we are waiting to see Gaban's next move.